So the most fundamental need we have is to be seen and taken care of, and a sense of belonging and safety comes from being in the tribe.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Strong Stoic Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Tumblin. Today, I have the privilege of talking with Tim Ash. Tim is an acknowledged authority on evolutionary psychology and digital marketing. He recently authored a book that just came out called Unleash Your Primal Brain, Demystifying How We Think and Why We Act. So I've been talking a lot about evolutionary psychology, so I thought it would be great to have him in. We had a great discussion on the human condition. So I don't want to ruin anything, but I hope you enjoy it. Hello, Tim. How are you today? Thanks for joining me.
Oh, my pleasure, Brandon. Looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk with you. You're really knowledgeable in a particular topic, which I'm right in the grit of right now, evolutionary psychology. And I actually was thinking, we had a chat a few weeks ago, and maybe the best place to start would be where that conversation somewhat ended. So if you recall, I mentioned at the end of our conversation that I enjoyed it. We touched some really deep topics. However, I felt both good and bad about the conversation. Positive emotion and negative emotion all sort of wrapped up in one big conundrum. And you replied with, welcome to the human condition. So maybe we can start by defining what the human condition is and why it's sometimes terrible.
Well, I don't know that it's terrible. Terrible is a judgment, and as a Stoic, you shouldn't be throwing judgments around, right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
No, the way I would put it is we're not some exceptional thing. I mean, in Christianity and in Western thought, there's this notion that we're here to rule over the animals and the natural world, and we're somehow above it or beyond it or the highest exemplar of it. And the fact is, we're just animals. And so when I look at it from an evolutionary biology and psychology standpoint, you have to retrace the arc of evolution. There was some common things that we shared with very early life on Earth, and some things we share with mammals, some things we share with just great apes, and some bizarrely human things that evolved at the very end that let us take over the whole planet and live in every ecological niche. Now, looking at it purely from that animal standpoint, there's nothing, we're not outside the bounds of how other animals live. And that means that our brains are wired for survival. And everything we do as humans, we're just trying to improve our chances of survival, of reproducing, of throwing our genes into the next generation. And so there's some things that come with that are unavoidable.
Right. Yeah, because it seems to be this constant tension in life between positive emotion and negative emotion. Like we're sort of always in this conundrum. And I think there's this thing now where everyone's looking for happiness, the key to happiness, and they think it's this utopia that they can find where it's like sustained happiness. And I think maybe some drugs can do that for you for a couple hours, but in terms of like realistically speaking, I don't. I'll get your input on it as well, but I don't think that's a reasonable expectation to assume that you can actually achieve that positive emotion, steady.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, well, I can't speak for all human beings. I'm not some super evolved, Zen or Buddhist master. I don't know what living in bliss with the unity of the universe is. And I'm not making light of it. Perhaps that's possible. And you can trigger that through your body and certain practices and so on. But again, just in terms of the way most people operate, we have emotions are there to prioritize our actions. It's that simple. Things that have no emotional saliency, that are neutral, we ignore. In fact, the vast majority of information doesn't even make it into our conscious minds at all. It's just ignored outright. But then of all the information that does impact us consciously or subconsciously, we have to prioritize it. Otherwise, we'd be paralyzed because in any moment, you can do infinitely many things. You could stand on your head. You could pick your nose. You can scratch your butt. Again, it's just anything is possible. So what are you choosing to do depends on strong emotions. So the memories and emotions are there to prioritize whether we act. And by far, the largest amount of time is not doing anything. That's the default. That saves us mental and physical energy, and let's just keep cruising along. So emotions are there to prioritize actions. That's the best way to put it. Nothing more, nothing less. Even calling them good or bad, they're just like, should I get off my butt and do something? That's what emotions are for.
Right. Yeah. That's a huge thing, is the prioritizing. And I feel like today, like, we're sort of attacking that, because really what you're talking about is, like, you could say it's a hierarchy of action, right? Like, what's the most important thing to me right now? And you can base that on whatever emotional system is, I guess, most powerful at the time. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if you get the same feeling. I feel like we're attacking that whole idea that some things, some actions, some ideas are better or worse than others, or as you would say, are maybe more important in the current moment in terms of priority. But it's certainly the case. And in terms of, like, because you mentioned, excuse me, like survival functions, and then also we have, all this mammalian part of our brain. Is it the case that, like, the more ancient part of the brain it is, sort of, like you mentioned, it's more into the unconscious activity, but can that system sort of hijack us in certain situations?
Well, let's see. I'm going to question the premise behind your question, which is that there's an us and then something else is hijacking it. The fact is just the opposite, that this notion that our conscious mind is in control, that's the illusion. 95% of our mental processing is happening at the unconscious level. And that conscious part that makes plans, forms social relationships, has access to language to talk about things, that's on standby, and it only gets activated when there are no immediate threats and when we face something novel that we've never encountered before and have no emotional association with. That's when you kick it upstairs, as it were, to the rational mind. The rest of the time, the rational mind, the neocortex, is really expensive to operate, so it's essentially kept on standby to conserve energy.
Yeah, and you said it's like, I don't know if you use this term in your book, which we'll talk about in a second here, but it's kind of like turbo, isn't it? Like, you only have a little bit, and it runs out, and once it runs out, you're sort of drained. Like, I remember. Yeah. In fact, the turbo is a good analogy. I'll use a different one. You might have seen those Mad Max movies back in the day. Turn on the nitrous oxide bottle. Okay, well, you only have 30 seconds of nitrous. Okay, and just like that, the conscious mind gets depleted very quickly. We make horrible decisions. There's a famous study of Israeli judges that were considering parole requests and whether to grant parole. And it turned out that the biggest determiner was time of day. So after breakfast and after lunch, they'd be more likely to give parole. And when their blood sugar was low, they'd be less likely to give parole. And this was across a couple of hundred judges. And we think we're making rational decisions about the person in front of us asking for the parole. Bullshit. It just has to do with how hungry we are. Yeah, that's a crazy thing. Then that's pretty good advice if you're... If you have something difficult to talk about with your partner, maybe give them a sandwich first, and you probably increase your chances. And the other thing you mentioned too in the book was sleep. That's something else that if we don't get enough of, it's like. And I was actually thinking, because I had as I mentioned to you personally, I had a bit of a work emergency yesterday, and so I got maybe slightly less than 6 hours of sleep, which is very uncommon for me. Yeah. Normally, I plan around it. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, because in your book you said less than 6 hours, you're more likely to...
Bad news, yeah. So don't just sleep 7 to 9 tonight, because the 2 back-to-back nights of 6 hours or less of sleep is the equivalent of skipping a night of sleep. That's how bad it is. And there's all kinds of new evidence coming out now that if people consistently sleep 6 hours or under in middle age, their risk of dementia goes up by 3 to 5x. I mean, it's really bad news. Sleep is not optional. It's daily life support, and every form of animal life and insect life on the planet has some form of sleep. Anything that lives longer than a few days sleeps. I'll give you some very enlightening examples. So dolphins are mammals like us, but so they have to breathe. But unfortunately, it's hard to do when you're swimming underwater. So they've evolved to basically have one hemisphere of their brain be asleep while the other one does the breathing part.
Right.
And birds, migratory birds that fly thousands of miles every year to get from one place to another, they actually take micro naps. They're flying high enough where they'll take a nap, they'll start dropping out of the sky, and they'll wake up before they hit the ground and keep going. But the point is,
Right.
even for them, sleep's not optional.
I'm just trying to imagine, do you have any idea what that would feel like to have half your brain sort of shut off? Because you put that in your book, and I remember reading that going, Jesus, that, like, half your brain getting shut off. Maybe I felt that before, when you sort of, you don't understand something you're reading, you go over it 20 times and you just can't seem to get it. Because we don't have anything equivalent to that. I mean, we have sleep, but in terms of shutting off half the brain.
We actually have very huge demands on our brains. And again, from an evolutionary standpoint, if you look at our great ape cousins, our closest relations, they use about 8% of their resting energy to power their brains. We use about a quarter of our resting metabolism to power brain, 3 times as much. Now, if you think about that as an energy system in the body, that's a massive ask. So we've actually had to have wimpier digestive systems, weaker muscles, pound for pound, or kilogram per kilogram for you Canadian friends, you were about 30% weaker than a chimp. So never pick a fight with a chimp. It'll tear you apart. So all of these adaptations are there just to borrow energy to give to our brain, and it better be doing something useful. And sleep is basically restoration for the brain. And we've pack something even more intense into less sleep. Again, other primates sleep 10 to 12 hours. We sleep about 8.
Right.
Because we came out of the trees in Africa and we're in a much more dangerous position on the ground. Somebody had to watch over us at night while others slept. And it was a lot more fitful, restless sleep. So we had to pack more complicated stuff in terms of our social groups and our brain sophistication into even less time. So you can't cheat it anymore. So put your phone away. Don't even keep it in your bedroom.
I feel.
Don't do 4-hour work week. All that bullshit. I mean, it's fine to go to wake up at 5 as long as you're going to bed at 9 the night before and you're getting your 8 hours. But you can't cheat sleep. You're only really killing yourself, literally.
Well, that was something that I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm a huge nerd, but I was always really, really good on my sleep schedule. Like always, up until. Even like during exams, like people, my classmates when I was in university would, they'd stay up late, they'd crunch the night before, and I'd say, no, like if I'm not ready the night before, I'm not ready. Like I'm done. Yeah.
So here's what happens if you don't sleep. First of all, you can think of your mind as being packed full of the current day's events. So if you don't sleep, that never gets flushed out. You're stomping on top of whatever you remembered before. So by studying and cramming like that, you actually, unless you sleep after some kind of learning, you don't retain it. And that goes for mental stuff as well as physical skills. You can have a great workout, learn how to play soccer or golf or whatever better. And if you don't sleep, you don't learn the physical skills. Right. Equally important, we don't make associations with distant things. So you don't get to overlay today's memories on our past life experience. So creativity really suffers. A lot of times if you go to sleep thinking about something, you'll wake up the next morning with a solution to it. And that's not a surprise. That's actually what the brain's there for, to make those kind of more creative associations. And finally, and most importantly, most of our life is super social. And one of the things that sleep does is it recalibrates and fine-tunes your emotional reactions to people. If you don't get sleep, we all know this, we get grumpy, and people actually get paranoid. You show them the same pictures of people's faces, and they will read them as being more aggressive. So we think we get paranoid, essentially, and think everyone's out to get us. So we're not reading emotions properly, and we can't function in society as a result of that. So for all those reasons and many more, get some sleep.
Well, that's really dangerous too for someone that's like a manager, right? Like if you're regularly not getting sleep, and your team probably knows it. Like, and I know like probably the best managers I've ever had, they've gotten regular sleep, and they could have been like maybe the bad managers were good from a technical perspective. Maybe they knew the material well, they were knowledgeable, but they're a little grumpy sometimes, right? It's because they're not getting that sleep.
Yeah, a little grumpy, a
little grumpy. And, I've felt that too about you mentioned about learning the next day. Because when I was a teenager, I was really into lead guitar. And I would like, practice and go through it and go through it. And I would suck. Like when I'm doing it, I would suck. I'd have to go really slow. But I knew the next morning I'd get up and I'd be able to play that thing like nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's, and I think you described it in your book. It's like a chalkboard. You're sort of this sort of short-term memory thing. So you learn, you put it on a chalkboard, but sleep is what transitions what's on the chalkboard into like a book that you actually have.
Yeah, the way to think of it, I actually liken it to using a washing machine, and you have 3 cycles during your wash. The first one is to get rid of the dirt, and that just means throwing away crap that's useless. So ignoring things, flushing it down the toilet, whatever you want to call it, throwing it away. The second thing is to tie it to or rehearsing and repeating the things that are important. So it's essentially amplifying what's left. Okay. The final thing is to bond it onto your past life experiences, so you have a kind of coherent sense of self. And that consolidation is also very important. So there's no such thing as I guess like in a Black Mirror episode where you have life recall and you could just rewind your life and every little detail is recorded. I mean, you're basically the sum total of your fading memories, if you want to think of it that way.
Now, I got to ask about something that a lot of people's probably wondering about with naps. You mentioned in the book that naps, we've been evolved. Do I remember that correctly? We've been evolved to sort of take an afternoon nap, or
Yep, exactly right. We have biphasic sleep. We have the main part at night, and then we have early afternoon sleep. And this is across all cultures. And this was studied extensively at Greeks who, until 70s or 80s, had napping as part of their culture. And when that changed, there was an abrupt change in all kinds of health problems and conditions when they stopped napping. But this isn't I had a big lunch and so I feel sluggish. Even independently of any midday meal you have, there's a kind of biorhythms lull in the early afternoon.
So should people, because the reason I'm asking this is because my work is sporadic and sometimes I do have to take naps, but I find if I carry through that napping routine when I actually am in a position to get regular, consistent sleep, I have trouble getting to sleep that night.
Yeah, which is why it should happen early in the afternoon. So, around 1:32 is when you should take that nap, not at 3 or 4, because then you're you're too alert to go down into the main sleep cycle.
Well, that is I think when most people get that sluggishness, like right after lunch. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's because you got 4 more hours of work that you got to get through, but
well, no, it turns out no. It's just a safe time to sleep from an evolutionary standpoint.
Right. I want to go into something that you talked about, I think quite early on, and then you wrapped it up in the end, which is really good. But I want to make sure I understand what you were saying, and I want to make sure that it's not misunderstood by everyone else. And that's the quote the lie of rationality. So you start off and you say that, rationality, I think the point you were trying to make is that how we think about rationality right now is not what it really is that it's fundamentally built on emotions. So right now, if you, most people would say that you have sort of 2 sides. You have an emotional side and then you have a rational side.
Yeah, that, pardon me, right brain, left brain BS, right?
Yeah. So your point was not, I don't think your point was that the rational things that we do, such as, planning and delayed gratification and I guess logic, this sort of stuff, it's not that that's wrong. It's that our way of conceptualizing it is wrong. Is that it's not separate from emotion. It's built upon emotion.
Well, yeah, yes and no. I mean, all parts of the brain work together. So again, from an evolutionary standpoint, you could think of them as extra capabilities that were added at some point to some brains in some species. Okay, and so we have the reactive brain, the triune brain theory is a little simplistic description of it, but essentially the reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, and the human brain, if you want to talk about it as a cartoon. And the reptiles, they did really well by just having automatic responses. If it moves and it's bigger than me, run away. If it moves and it's smaller than me, chase it and eat it. Basic things like that. You don't really need any judgment or decision making. It's just automatic. And automatic works really well most of the time. And then on top of that, the mammals evolved this limbic system, which is a very close interaction of emotions with memory. Like the only things that we don't know about are the ones that the conscious brain needs to consider. I mentioned that earlier. And that's because if we have an association with it, then it already has an emotional weight. In order to have that, we have to have remembered the association. And so that's where our past experiences shape what we consider pleasurable or painful. For example, I might have had a really skinny girlfriend and she broke up with me and broke my heart. Well, I'm going to be more cautious of dating skinny women. Right? I mean, I just made that example up out of whole cloth. But the point is that there's an association. Had the first girlfriend that broke up with me been overweight, then I'd have the same association with overweight women. They're heartbreakers. So it's a learned response. It's based on our life path and our life experiences. And so that's that layer. And then there's the kind of conscious mind, one that can look at itself and plan and have thoughts and so on. All that part does is give us options. It can't decide. It still has to kick it back down to that emotional machinery to make the decision and prioritize. So I mean this literally. There is no decision without a subconscious component. The conscious mind can't decide. All it does is provide us with, here are your choices.
Yeah, and you described it in one way, which I really liked, is that sort of rationalizing things moves things from like a short-term emotional reaction to sort of a long-term emotional plan, so to speak. I don't know if I worded that exactly how you said.
Well, Robert Heinlein, he's a science fiction author that said a long time ago, man is not a rational animal. He's a rationalizing animal. And so you see brain scans and there's a golden age of brain science right now, but in real time you can see an emotional response and effectively a decision being made in the brain. And then another part of the brain lights up and you verbalize why you made it. But it's a total alibi. It's totally made up. It has nothing to do with the underlying subconscious reason for the action. And it happened a split second later within the conscious parts of the brain. So again, it's a cover story. That's the best way to put it. If you ask me why I did something, I can't tell you.
Right. Yeah, I think it's really hard for people to conceptualize because by definition, we're talking about things that are happening subconsciously. So it's not within your conscious.
Yeah, exactly right. And by the way, here's a little more insight into what the conscious mind is really for. Essentially, there's a famous anthropologist, Robin Dunbar, and he posited that the size of our social groups or tribes for mammals determine the size of the neocortex or the new part of the brain. And based on that, he calculated this kind of group size of about 100 to 200 for humans, by far the largest of any mammal, by the way. So imagine the complex needs of modeling our behavior in the tribe. Who's dominant, who's related to whom, who owns whom favors. If I did this podcast with you and you know my uncle and then I want to go into business with his brother, those kind of links. So basically, the conscious brain is there to model in real time our standing in our immediate genetic tribe of 100 to 200 people. That's it.
Right.
That's what it's used for. And language and everything else is to facilitate that. Most of our language is used for talking about people and telling stories about people. It's about modeling that social world. So it's a pretty advanced social modeling tool. Now, my own personal theory, and then there's some evidence to back this up, is that people that are on the autism spectrum, they actually aren't really bad at modeling stuff. They're so overwhelmed by all kinds of social stimuli that they actually deconstruct faces and emotions and everything else, and to control this flood of inputs that are coming at them. So essentially what they do is they turn off social reasoning, which is what the neocortex is primarily for. And instead what they decide to do with that capacity is do stuff that most of us can't do, really detailed thinking, engineering, music, math. And so what I think happens is there's actually a few outliers that we would consider in some sense in modern society of having mental health problems or limitations, or being the nerd, the Einstein, the outcast, the Big Bang Theory kind of people. And there's a few of them, and they're actually pushing back the frontiers of human knowledge, and the rest of us are just spreading it around and doing our usual gossiping social stuff.
Yeah.
So we're not here because we can build microwave ovens and send rockets to the moon. We're here because we successfully cooperate in larger groups than other mammals. And that's what the conscious brain is for.
That's a key point too, and I want to get into this idea of the individual in the West and groups and all that, because I've had people actually argue with me that there's no such thing as the collective. And I don't know how to.
Sorry, I just had to laugh out loud.
No, let's get it on the recording. But yeah, because I don't understand this, because if you learn to watch yourself, which I've been trying to get better at, and it's hard to do, but if you can actually try and see yourself from an external perspective, all the little things you do, we do things all day, every day, because of social pressure to conform to the group, and if you can actually, again, to get back to your point, we rationalize this all the time. Like when we're in that group, maybe we do something that maybe we wouldn't do, but because the group is there, we do something a little bit differently, and then we rationalize it for some reason. But I think I've been trying to explain to people and give like concrete examples that if you actually watch yourself in groups, you'll see yourself and hear yourself say things and do things not because you probably don't want to do it, but because the group, because of group conformity, because you want to conform.
Absolutely. That's huge. Let me take the long way around to get to group conformity, which is why it's even in our psychology. So if you think about other animals that occupy wide ecological niches, they physically adapt to their niche. Squirrels are a perfect example. You have ones that are a few grams, ones that are several kilograms, some that fly because they have kind of wings or webbing, others that have rotating ankles and they can run headfirst down tree trunks. It's good stuff. The point is there's huge variation based on where they live. And human beings, there isn't that much variation. Pygmies are about 1.50 m. The Dutch are the world's tallest men at about 1.83 m or something. But there's really not that much difference in terms of our size variations or physical adaptations. I mean, surface stuff like skin color, eye color, things like that, but really no functional differences. And so how did we spread out from the Antarctic to the Himalayas and to the Sahara Desert and everywhere in between? Well, we placed one big evolutionary bet on learning and culture. So we're there to transmit culture. So the idea is, okay, I might be weak and I might be in a small tribe of people, but they know so much about the local environment that if I just watch them and learn from them, I'm going to be much more effective in this environment. Right. I mean, you take an Aborigine from Australia and you put them with the Canadian native people north of the Arctic Circle, he's not going to survive because his cultural knowledge isn't suited for that environment, and vice versa.
Right.
So it's really important that we get this head start from our tribe that has this deep wisdom and knowledge about our local environment. And so we place this bet on transmitting culture. That's our giant bet. In order to do that effectively, we have to understand who to learn from. So we tend to learn from co-ethnics, people of the same gender, people that speak the same dialect, even if it's babies that don't speak, prefer babble in their own dialect to babble in other dialects. I mean, so we're selecting for role models that are essentially genetically like us and most likely to be part of our tribe. And then we also look for people that other people think are experts.
Right.
And so we have the second order kind of learning of learning who to learn from. Learning from the people around us about who the good teachers are. And that creates this kind of unique need in people, not just to dominate, although there's still some of that bullying in our psychology, but mentoring. There's both a need to mentor and a need to be mentored.
Yep.
Otherwise, I'd just hoard my knowledge and never pass it on to you. And so all of that basically is there because we're stronger in a group a cohesive group than we are alone. The worst thing you can do to any mammal, but especially a human, is deny them the safety of the herd and the tribe. And the way you stay a member in good standing in a human tribe is you take the cultural package you're given, you absorb it, you parrot it without question or modification, and it passes along efficiently to everybody else. If you are the squeaky wheel, you're not going to get the oil, you're just going to get thrown out of the tribe. And so we have this escalating consequences from social banishment, denying economic opportunities, mating opportunities, to ostracism, to eventually death. And if you don't toe the line, if you don't toe the party line, because cultural advantages are so strong that being antisocial and individualistic and questioning the cultural package around you is actually very maladaptive.
Yeah, I think people struggle with this idea of culture because, like, I completely agree with what you said there, obviously, because it's like culture offers a place for you. Now, there's a cost. The cost is you have to conform. The cost is, and really, let's be honest, you don't have a choice. Like, if you're born, I didn't choose to be born, Canadian or you American, even though I don't know if you agree with this, but I think we're pretty similar cultures between America and Canada. But you don't really choose what culture you get born into.
You guys apologize a lot more than we do.
Yes. There's actually a law in the legal system that if you say sorry in court, they can't use it to assume that you actually did the crime because people just apologize.
That's so Canadian.
Yeah. So you don't choose the culture you get born into. But there's two sides to culture. There's the protective element, which is, here's the things you need to know, and you're in this group now, and we will protect you, and there's a place for you. But then there's also, by exact definition, an oppressive element to it. And I think a lot of people today are struggling with this because they're only really focusing on the oppressive sides of for example, Western culture, and failing to recognize the massive benefits of conforming to a group.
Yeah, I think that Western culture is a really strange thing. Since the Renaissance, this idea that we're individuals, that our life story matters, that our personal happiness matters, that's a very, very Western notion. And in most societies, I'd say in Asia, traditional communal living is much more strongly enforced. Revering your elders and your ancestors, listening to what your parents tell you, and they even might get to pick your mates and your husband or wife in life and things like that. Major decisions that we would rebel against here in the West. But we're the weird ones. Yeah, we're really the ones that are going against human nature. And but here's the thing. What we don't realize is that the cultural package of the West is so strong, including the idea of individualism, that we're actually swimming in that soup without realizing. But the very idea of being an individual was downloaded to you through surrounding culture.
Yeah, and this is something I want to poke at a little bit, because I don't think we can, the group conformity, everything we just talked about, I don't think there's any arguing about that. We all conform to groups. There's very few people that live in the woods by themselves, and you know what I mean? Yeah. They exist, but it's very, very rare. But I've been thinking about this idea of the individual, and the Western idea of the individual, which is sort of built upon Judeo-Christian values, right?
And Greco-Roman, yeah.
Yeah. It stretches back way back, and this is actually where I want to get to with it, because if you look at all the ancient religious stories, they all focus around an individual who saves the group in some sense, right? Like you can look at Marduk, but even like all the Disney movies, which I'm a big kid, so I like to talk about the Disney movies, but like Mulan and Moana, like all these are stories about, really any hero story is a story about an individual saving the group through things like courage, through things like speaking truth. And so what I've been thinking about is, this focus on the individual, does that come from that philosophical idea that the individual, through through speaking truth and oftentimes going against the group and risking ostracism and all the horrible things that you just mentioned. Sometimes they actually do get ostracized. But is it through the individual that can actually save the group from itself? And maybe it's not that you can just eliminate the groups. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to focus only on the individual values or benefits of the individual, completely disregarding the group identity. But really, at least what I think, and I really want to know what you think about this, is that sort of why a lot of our stories are about individuals saving the group, is because we know that there's toxic elements to it.
Well, I don't know that but yes, certainly the hero's journey is a classical story form, and it's been there since the dawn of time. But I don't know that we're getting into the realm of storytelling, and there are other kind of stories.
Yes.
And basically, the way to think about all stories is they reinforce cultural values of your tribe. And again, reinforce the cohesion of the tribe and how well it functions. So all human conflict is really tribe on tribe conflict. Even, okay, David may have slayed Goliath, but whatever was left of the Jews, they were going to get overrun by the rest of Goliath's army. I mean, if it hadn't gone to that kind of one-on-one way to solve the problem, right? They had no chance. So if you look at all of human conflict, it's tribe on tribe conflict, and the most cohesive tribes win. And that's where tribal conformity again is important. And I don't want to get pulled into this notion that the hero's journey is somehow defining of the stories we tell. What happens on that journey defines the values of the tribe. That's what I think is the more interesting part of it. So, for example, in the Odyssey, Odysseus does all kinds of clever things, right? Mm-hmm. He tricks the Cyclops, he does this or that, and gets himself out of a bunch of scrapes. So that idea that being resourceful and flexible is a good thing is a cultural value that's being transmitted in that story. Yes, it's along the lines of the hero's journey, okay, but what are the tools, the allies, the obstacles that were faced? How were they overcome? What we're doing by telling personal stories, and by the way, almost all stories are personal or anthropomorphized animals, is we're essentially getting secondhand learning. One of the functions of storytelling from an evolutionary standpoint is we get to do something potentially high risk or high stakes without paying the price. So we get to hear a story about what happened instead of having to do what it takes to make that happen and pay the price of making it happen. So a lot of those stories that we hear about, for example, Anne Frank, and her life would be stories of good people and doing something right in the name of evil or oppression or something like that, right? So the people that helped her, the ethics of the Dutch that helped the Jews hiding among them. We're transmitting cultural stories by telling the hero's journey stories.
But if you have a group, and we can think about it in any way, let's say the country, or you can even say like maybe the scientific community would be a great way for this example. If there's no new information coming into the group, right? If there's no individual hero story. And obviously that happens with each individual on some level, maybe some not at all. But if there's no new information coming into the group, then over time the group information becomes outdated, right? So I would think that, and I was thinking about this from an evolutionary perspective, there's got to be a huge benefit to having some level of, inducing chaos into the group to save the group. And here's an example I was thinking of. So if we have a neighboring tribe and I go to the next group and I see that they have this secret weapon, and I come back to my group and I say, listen, like these guys got this weapon and it's crazy. It's going to kill us all. We have to get out of here. They're probably going to first be like, no, you're crazy. This doesn't exist. You're stupid. There's going to be a little bit of pushback, right? I'm going to have to go against the group in order to sort of present this truth. And hopefully I'm smart enough to do it in a way that they don't just kill me and that they still allow me in the group. And then maybe I can sort of find myself in between an individual and a group and then convince people that this is a real threat.
Yeah, so let's be clear. There are two types of dynamics. There's intergroup dynamics and intragroup dynamics. So inside the group, you still have all the usual dominance hierarchy stuff that we share with other mammals. Alpha males and females that get more mating opportunities, more resources. Whether your information is going to be transmitted inside the group depends on your status within it. That's the way to look at it. So if you have higher status, you're more likely to be followed. If a leader says an opinion, then that's what everyone's going to follow them. So actually, unanimity is important. It's very hard to go against that. If everyone's lined up against you and you're the only one, that's a very hard place to be. But even a few influential people can really swing group dynamics and opinions.
Do you think hierarchies are inevitable?
Absolutely. I mean, for mammals, they are.
Yeah.
Again, if you look at snakes or lizards or reptiles or turtles, they lay their eggs and they're off, and hopefully some of them will hatch. Okay, there's not a lot of parenting going on. That's not true. Some penguins will still rook and nest and try to keep their eggs warm enough to stay alive, but limited parenting, let's say. Whereas for mammals, it's all about bonding. I mean, we have that parent-child bond. Oxytocin is the chemical used for that. And it's this two-edged sword. Most people think of it as like the cuddle hormone or something. Well, it's actually either you're in the in-group or you're in the out-group. So it's bonding against 4 members of your tribe, and it's violent aggression against outsiders. It's actually both. So you better be on the right side of that knife edge.
Yeah, the oxytocin thing, or oxytocin, that's an amazing hormone. I don't know if you mentioned this in your book, but I've learned this somewhere recently about how the women, when they have children, they get this massive influx of oxytocin, and it literally changes their brain chemistry. And I've actually seen this personally with a family member. Mm-hmm. And I saw them go from like being a little upset about being pregnant to, holy crap, this is my life. And it was like one day or like one hour. It was insane.
No, absolutely. Because I mean, when you think about it, we have this, you can think of it as attachment aversion thing, right? So when would you voluntarily move towards something that was screaming, demanding, angry, irrational? Never. Okay.
That's a great way to think of it.
Describe the baby. Okay. So to overcome that, you have to kind of shift the boundary of, that's happening, but it's in my in-group. That's happening, but those are my genes. So I better take care of this thing. Okay. So you're absolutely right. During pregnancy, women will get rewired to be mothers.
Now, men don't have the similar transition, do they? It seems to be more of a longer-term, eventual, slow transition.
Well, it's more fundamental in women, and it's more far-reaching because they're literally giving sustenance. If you don't breastfeed the baby, it dies. Okay, so the men, I mean, our contribution is fairly limited to sperm donation. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But there's something interesting. Since we lived in these tribes, these small groups, and paternity was uncertain, like the Jews are pretty practical about this. They trace paternity or maternity through the mother. That's what establishes, your membership in the Jewish tribe. That's pretty practical. You always know who gave birth to the baby. Who's the father? Not so much. So they've done these studies about who does more caretaking among the grandparents, among the 4 grandparents. And it turns out that the maternal grandmothers do the most caretaking, and the paternal grandfathers do the least. And the reason is they're doubly uncertain. They're not sure their son was theirs, and they're not sure the son's kid was the son's.
Right.
Whereas the maternal grandmothers, that was my daughter, and that's her daughter. I mean, there's no question. So again, you're fighting these. That's something that comes out of this uncertain paternity idea that we definitely have deep in our psyche.
Yeah, that's a great point to solidify too. Is that there's an asymmetry between the sexes in terms of the cost of pregnancy, right? Like if a man and a woman have sex, the cost if the woman gets pregnant is so much severe. Even if our social systems have balanced out, say, the economical cost, the physical cost.
The chances of dying in childbirth,
exactly,
or the chances of that baby not being taken care of. So what women essentially select for, I mean, men select for genetic fitness and the likelihood that the woman can deliver and carry a baby to term. So we're looking for the hourglass figure and things like that. And it's not some kind of cultural distortion. Congenitally blind men also want, in a very narrow range, about a 0.7 hip
Right.
to waist ratio. So that hourglass figure is wired into our psyche because it's like, okay, can you push a bowling ball out between those hips? Which is essentially
Right.
giving birth to a human baby. So we look for that, and that's unchanging. For women, it's different. They need to make sure that the child would be provided for. So they're either looking for an established alpha male who already has power, or somebody who has the potential to become one. So if they're making their bets on someone who's younger or outside of the established hierarchy, they're looking for risk-taking behavior. So that's where you get that fireman, stock trader, day trader, whatever it is, bad boy image. And if that person's trajectory towards power and position doesn't materialize, they'll dump them. You'll see very few women that are further along in life that'll place a bet on the bad boy anymore. They might have tried that and it was fun in high school, but not later in life.
Even like musicians, you see like when they're in the teenage years, oh, Dad, I love him. He's like a musician. He's so artsy. And then, 5 years into his band, which isn't going so well, it's like, all right, I got to date someone from work. So you would say that the penis is not a social construct, basically.
How's that?
The penis is not a social construct.
Still not sure what to do with how to answer that.
There was a scientist who published a study as a joke, and it was called something like "The penis is a social construct."
Okay.
And he got it published in the journal, and the whole thing was a joke, right? And he was trying to illustrate that some of the humanities maybe are a little bit loose on their scientific. Anyways, I'm sure you know more about that than I do, but
I haven't run across that one. But no,
I'll have to send that to you. I'll send that to you afterward. But yeah, that was interesting. And then he came out and told everybody, this was a joke. I wasn't expecting to get this published. And yeah, anyways, it was a big thing. It was a big thing.
Well, depending on the penis, it can be.
That's right.
Sorry,
that's right. There. You had to do it. So evolutionary psychology. I've been studying this quite recently. I mean, I've been following some evolutionary psychologists like through podcasts and stuff and learning about it that way. But I mentioned to you, I'm reading David Buss's book at the moment, Evolutionary Psychology, and it seems to explain a lot of the issues we have today, particularly in between men and women, right? And so I know, so your book, and maybe this is a good time to bring up your book. So this is Unleash Your Primal Brain. This is a book that Tim wrote, and I got to say it's really good. It's really easy to read, which I like. It's got basically a picture of me in the gym every day as the cover.
The wild caveman, yeah.
The wild caveman, yeah. But it really goes into in sort of an understandable way, like how the brain works and how our hormones work, and a lot of the stuff we talked about today. So definitely highly recommend it. But do you think studying evolutionary psychology, maybe not in super depth, but being aware of sort of the teachings of it is something that I guess a lot of people should do, especially if they're interested in things like philosophy and psychology and understanding human relationships?
Yeah, it's funny. I wrote the book because I ran an internet marketing agency, and I still do a lot of marketing consulting, especially at the executive level, and as well as keynote speaking around the world. But it was mostly about online marketing. But my agency was super successful. We created $1.2 billion in value for our clients that we can document for the Googles and Nestle's and Expedias of the world, as well as smaller companies. Most of that was due to these applications of evolutionary psychology to marketing, what's called neuromarketing. Is this durable stuff. So it's not about the technology, it's about the evolutionary psychology. And if you're going to have a good career as a marketer, you should definitely understand how to persuade people. So it's not about whether there's going to be virtual reality or, I don't know, hologram suppositories tomorrow, whatever the technology is. It's about what you're trying to influence, which is the human brain. And from an evolutionary standpoint, that's frozen in time in today's moment. It's not going to change. So if you want the most bang for your buck, you should understand persuasion from a psychological standpoint. And within psychology, that's the evolutionary standpoint. Because as you mentioned, we picked up stuff along the way. So for example, we're talking about dopamine in our original discussion, and everybody thinks about it. Oh, those are the 3 blinking dots on your instant messenger while you're waiting for a reply, and it's like rewards and satisfaction and all that. Well, there's nothing distinctly human about that. We share that with fruit flies, with insects that have been around for hundreds of millions of years. So it's such a fundamental thing in life that for us to ignore it and to call it distinctly human is really off base. Dopamine is there to figure out how much energy to expend pursuing a goal. And if you don't get the goal you want, it's there to instantly rewire your brain. There's kind of an oh shit circuit in your brain when you don't get what you want that updates the mental model of the world, so you're more likely to get it next time. So this is like a general mechanism that works for pretty much all animal life on Earth. And then there's other chemicals that were layered on and other behaviors and other brain wiring. So what our operative goal right now is determines which part of the brain is essentially in charge. So it could be hunger, it could be mating opportunities, it could be more nuanced stuff, like I said, like social dynamics, and different parts of the brain are kind of one operative kind of survival goal at any given moment.
Right. I want to address, so like I said, I mentioned this to you personally as well, but I've been really enjoying evolutionary psychology. Like I really have. I really enjoyed your book and David Buss's book as well. But I want to address some of the critiques I've seen on it.
Sure.
One of the critiques is that it's sort of like the naturalistic fallacy is what they call it, right? Just because saying something is natural or that is part of our evolutionary history doesn't mean that it's necessarily ethical and moral. Now, I want to know your response to that, but my response to that is that evolutionary psychology is not about telling us what's moral or ethical. It's about understanding who we are so that we have some data point on which towards to move, right? Like we have to understand ourselves before we can even consider things like ethics and morals.
Well, exactly right. So ethics and morals and philosophy are cultural downloads. The fact that we want to transmit culture within our tribe is the operating system. So there's the operating system and then the software that we're using to run it, which we get from our immediate cultural environment. So I'm just describing, this is completely values neutral. I mean, on the one hand, you can't prove some of this evolutionary psychology stuff because, how do you prove what happened 100 million years ago on Earth? I can't do that directly, but we can say, hey, look, a lot of different species have this same thing, therefore it must be useful, and useful only from, again, the perspective of evolution and survival, and they're still around, right? But then when we're talking about humans, it gets really messy because we can't avoid these cultural overlays. So if I talk to you about, let's say, human monogamy, which I cover in the book, and I talk about sexuality, we're not monogamous. Only 3% of mammals are monogamous. We're not in that category, okay? There's all kinds of proof for that. But you add the cultural overlays of the agrarian revolution and women being treated like a property, and the desire of the church, Christian church, say, to pump out as many babies as possible. So that means the woman can't work. She just needs to take care of babies and make more of them. And then the moralistic stuff about cheating and the expectations of lifelong monogamy and being a failure if you get divorced. I mean, there's so many layers that culturally we put on top of that basic biological fact of non-monogamy that, it gets controversial in a hurry. But realize that that's going on at the cultural level, and it's not at the kind of foundational how we work level.
Well, yeah, and it's not to say that just because we have certain tendencies for things, let's even say between the genders, it's not to say that there's nothing we can do about it. Like you can socialize a lot of those things out, and we do that. Like we socialize a lot of things out. For example, a really tough one to talk about, but the idea of rape. Like in the West, we put the element of disgust on that, right? and we really socialize it out of kids at a young age. We certainly try to do our best. And the other thing we do is we try and make sure that people aren't put in positions that may bring out that part of humanity, such as like war. Like we try and avoid war. We try and live in peace. We try and like segregate bathrooms. So it's not that, let's say there's a certain thing that we have within us that let's say maybe male aggression or something like that. We can create social systems that can at least make the impacts of that less severe, right? Is that accurate?
Ooh, I don't know. And again, I know we're really in some controversial territory, and I'm just going to let fly from my evolutionary perspective. So, expecting lots of hate mail here, but no, but there's so men are the initiators, and women have the right to say no. They can often reject advances, but men are the ones initiating advances, generally speaking. And if you take the most powerful drive we have, which is, again, whether your genes get to continue. Let me flip it on its head. Dawkins, back in the 70s, wrote a book called The Selfish Gene, and he basically said, look, the genes are in charge. The only reason we have a brain at all is to help the genes reproduce. So the unit of consideration isn't the organism, it's the gene.
Right.
And so, it really took me a while to get my head around that, but he's absolutely right. So the continuity, the reason that, you hear the statistic like all life on Earth is 98% the same genetically, or whatever the percentage is. Well, it's true because it's a basic program for building life as a sequence. It's a little subroutine for building life. And so as we, as a fetus grows inside of the womb, it's going through all the stages of evolution, and it goes from, tadpole to piglet, and then the tail de-evolves because that's the final step to being a human. But all of that is essentially recreating evolution and fast forward. But it's just the program. The genes are there just as how to build it. It's the instructions for the Lego build. Okay. Right. And so if you look at it from that perspective, the brain is there because it was useful to the genes for them to reproduce. And that's it. That's its limited function. And so when you get to the most high stakes event for any animal, which is, do you get to survive and reproduce your genes? They're going to take a lot of risks to do that. In fact, in sexual reproduction, there is no species that doesn't have a preliminary or qualifying event before sex. Whether it's a battle of two walruses, or it's the male bird building a nest, or another bird singing a song, whatever it is, there's a qualifying event says, are you a good mate? Okay. Right. But from the other side too, there's what am I willing to do for throwing my genes into the next generation? Pretty much anything. And that's where male aggression comes from. And it's not going away, and there's no way you're going to socialize it out of us regarding of any cultural systems. I'm not saying it's sanctioning rape or something like that. I'm disgusted by the fact that in the U.S., 1 in 4 women in her lifetime is going to be sexually assaulted. That's the statistic. So you may call it civilized. To me, that's just unacceptable. And I'm raising a daughter, in the society and trying to prepare her for that. So again, I'm not advocating rape. I'm certainly not sanctioning male aggression. But to again understand, this is so deep in our animal nature that it's not going away. And given no consequences or turmoil or like you say, conditions of uncertainty and chaos and war or poverty or a lot of other factors, it's going to come out, no question. And one of the worst things that we can control is the tribalism, dehumanizing other people. So, right. Yeah, you're an animal. They're murderers and rapists. Right. That dehumanization allows us to act that way towards other human beings. So if there's a tug of war, it's between in-group and out-group versus a universalist view of reality.
Yeah, and that's a great point because we touched a little bit on group toxicity, but one of the antidotes to group toxicity you propose in your book, which I liked, is it's a fundamental Christian idea, and it's a Stoic idea, and that's making your group larger, meaning find relations with people, with humanity as a whole, as opposed to, for example, I'm Canadian, or for example, I'm American, or for example, I'm a white Caucasian male. Like, expand the group and consider us as a whole, and that's the idea of the cosmopolitan, and which again is a fundamental Christian and Stoic idea. But I think it's a good one.
Yeah, there's a Thomas Friedman, who's a columnist for the New York Times and written some excellent books. He had one called The Lexus and the Olive Tree, and he talked about this tension between two worldviews, one of a place and tradition and locality in our tribe, or embodied by the olive tree and the sense of place in the world, and another by the Lexus, which is one of the top benefits of living in the industrialized modern world and the excellence of that, right? And there, a lot of things can be understood as that tension. Some people find safety in their small group and in the stability of that. Others find safety in examining humanity as, we're all brothers, we're all sisters, we're all related. In the Lakota Sioux language, there's a phrase, mitakoye yasin, which means, they say it during prayers and things like that, for all of my relations. And it's a recognition that we're part of the web of life. So you said, part of our humanity. Well, it goes beyond that. It goes to the creepy crawlers and the fish and the birds and the sky and nature and all of it, because we're one with everything. And they've actually shown sociologically that quote unquote conservative people just have a more local locus of focus versus progressive people. So let me say another. Let me make that.
I like
tangible.
that locus of focus.
Sorry, I didn't mean to be so alliterative there. But for example, if you see in the U.S. we have detentions along the southern borders of people desperately trying to get into the country, and under Trump, we are separating children from their families as a way to deter them from coming over. I mean, so there's two views of that, the people in the Trump cult would say, well, those people don't look like me, they don't speak the same language, they don't go to my church, they don't live in my town. Therefore, they're kind of subhuman animals, and there's nothing wrong with that. Now, I think true Christians, by the way, which are a subset of that, have a really hard time squaring that circle. On the other hand, you'd have what I'd call universalists, and they would say, look, this is a fundamental human values here. You can't put children in cages. It doesn't matter who they are. Right. And so someone that has a more universalist view is going to be violently against it, and someone that might have a localist view is going to find it acceptable as long as it's none of the members of their tribe. And so they've actually shown this as a dimension between being conservative and, I guess you could say, closed and open-minded, as maybe one way to put it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you think people, because I think I fit more in the second category, like the trying to find connections between all humanity. But I think part of what brought me there was the fact that I've always had trouble with smaller groups growing up, right? Like I was always part of groups. I was part of sports teams, part of bands, part of the nerdy club, the engineering, I was part of groups, but I was never a fully conforming member to the group. And so that put a bit of a wall, So do you think do you think you can be both? Do you think you can be part of smaller groups? I mean, obviously everyone, like families, which is probably the smallest group, but do you think there's some kind of connection there between recognizing all of humanity and maybe not being less likely to be welcomed by smaller groups?
Yeah, I would say on a personal level, I think back to my high school. I was, art editor of the yearbook, a photo editor of the newspaper. I played some intramural volleyball. I was also on the Knowledge Bowl team and the Physics Olympics, and then I played Dungeons and Dragons with my nerd friends. So I was like on the fringes of a lot of groups, but not a full-fledged member of any of them, I guess you could say. And so, yeah, that feeling of being kind of an outsider lets you see other people's perspectives. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to actually get people to travel. And you'll find that there are more insular, I hate to say it, but it's literally true also, inbred communities in mountainous regions, because it's really, really hard to travel in the mountains. So the
Right.
Swiss or the people in West Virginia, I mean, they don't go too far from where they were born because it's hard to walk over mountains. Whereas if you have flat places like Central Europe, like Germany, where you can get to it from many, many directions, you're going to have influences from all of the surrounding countries and areas. So I think a lot of it has to do with geography and insular places also like islands, like Japan. Was opened up by the Americans in the 1880s at gunpoint, but they managed to live for thousands of years on a couple of islands, and so the geography has a huge part in this too.
Yeah.
How often do you come into contact with people unlike
Right.
you? And how quickly does that happen? Sometimes it can be overwhelming if you have a very cohesive tribe and all of a sudden immigrants from a different culture move into your city or your neighborhood. And that times it's happening right in front of you and you can't adjust to the change. Well, that actually makes you hunker down more into your existing tribe and try to cling to that for stability.
Well, yeah, and traveling, that was really the impetus for me to sort of open my mind a little bit in terms of my identity, because I had this, everyone's, again, to get back to the being ingrained into a culture, the Canadian culture, at least the way I was brought up, was like, we're all told why we're special. Mm-hmm. Canadians are told they're special because we're the kindest people in the world.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some
Except
truth
for
to
all
that.
those tens of thousands of native children that are getting dug up all over the country. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, exactly. I mean, every country, every people has good and evil and has done good and evil, right? But when I traveled I did a work term in London, and I traveled around Europe for a while, and I started to see that, maybe people weren't, there's certainly differences, right? Like maybe people weren't as friendly, say, on the street. Like, here, if you see someone down the street, you nod, you smile. And I don't really like that because I'm introverted. I just want to keep walking, but that's sort of ingrained into the culture, right? And it's kind of weird if you don't do it again.
You should move to the Nordics,
maybe I should,
right in Sweden or Norway.
Yeah. But what I found was that if I actually spoke with someone and tried to have a connection with them and was open about it, I actually had a lot more in common with them than I did different.
Yeah.
And so I came home from that sort of 4-month experience with an entirely different perspective on my previously held group identity of Canadian. And I still hold that group card, of course, but you know what I mean? Like I sort of had an outsider's view of it.
Yeah. Well, travel has two functions. One is to, like you say, show you that we're so much more alike. We all want a good life. We want our children to prosper. We don't want war, conflict. I mean, who would argue with that, right? And the other function that it serves, which is equally important, is you start seeing things like, oh, they do it differently there. So, for example, you went to England, you said? Mm-hmm. They drive on the quote-unquote wrong side of the road there. Well, it makes you think, there's nothing inherently correct about driving like we do in North America. It was just a choice somebody made along the way. And so you peel back a lot of things that you go, oh, that's not bedrock. That was a choice, or that was a cultural evolution that led to that based on local circumstances, or maybe the decisions, or someone maybe had a bad meal and decided they wanted to, put the line on the road over here or something like that. And there it all went from there, kind of the butterfly effect, right? So it broadens your mind to what's worth holding on to, what's bedrock. And you find out through travel that a lot less things are bedrock than you think.
Yeah. I think we should note maybe a downside of the cosmopolitan idea, which I've been thinking about a little bit lately. I'd like to know your input on it. I reason that if you share this idea that, of cosmopolitan, that shared identity with all humanity, for example, here in Canada, and if something happens here, if civil war breaks out, or if there's any sort of conflict in between groups here, and I am not a conforming member to either one of them, I have much less chance of survival, right? That gets down to sort of like what you talk about a lot in your in your book, which is how groups have a really strong if they have a really strong cohesion, they will be very, I guess, I can't remember the term you used, but combative towards outsiders. Maybe that's
allergic. Yeah, like reject the organ transplant, right?
Yes, yeah. The mob will come after you.
Yeah. Well, so to be clear, we will. The one thing that makes humans unique is, unlike other mammals, we're not just part of a genetic tribe. Yes, you should do everything you can to preserve your family and your close relations. And when there were 100 to 200 of us wandering around the plains of East Africa, they were probably your relatives. So you had this, again, uncertain paternity. You had some uncle, nephew, son, father, grandpa relationship to everyone in the group, right? And that's pretty easy when it's your kind of genetic material around you. But it's different for humans because of the cultural overlay. We can actually play different roles and simultaneously be part of different groups. So as you may see if you're watching this on video, I'm a member of the Streamlined Haircut Tribe. I'm completely bald, right? That's a choice. I'm a member of the Mercedes-Benz Driving Tribe, okay? And but I'm also a member of the Born in the Former USSR Tribe. Now, that one is not a chosen tribe. Like you said, we don't choose where we're born. Right? I don't choose to have a certain skin color or certain facial features. I didn't choose to be sexually abused if that happened to me, or malnourished. And so we have these tribal overlays that are actually, again, like our survival goals that are activated by this dominant situation we're in. So we're going to most closely align with you were like part of the nerd tribe, you said, right, in high school, and others. You could participate in them simultaneously, but one at a time.
Yeah, but it's like you said too. There's overlap, right? Because, like, for example, let's say the nerdy group that I was a part of, and also let's say the sports team basketball group. Let's say basketball. There's a quality that both of those share, which is dedication, hard work, loyalty, teamwork.
Well, group cohesion still matters, right? But then when you go to the cafeteria in high school, are you going to sit with the nerds or the basketball players? You can't do both. You have to choose one, and that actually, in a sense, is kind of like the more dominant tribe affiliation that was triggered by being in that situation is what's going to get expressed in your choice of doing that.
Right. Yeah, it makes me think of a question. Someone asked me if I was a loser in high school, and I said, I don't know, because I was a part of pretty much every group in high school. So I guess maybe some people would see that as being a loser, but I didn't really have an answer. And I'm not like emotional about it. I don't care. Maybe I was a loser, but I was trying to think about this. I was like, I don't know. Like, if you're a part of every group, I would not, obviously not every group, but I was a part of several groups that maybe generally don't overlap in terms of their members.
Yeah.
Like where do you lie? And this gets into the identity piece, which so many people sort of suffer with today. But yeah, that's a great point, that you can be part of several groups. It's not like you have to choose one, stick your pole in the ground. You know what I mean? Like, yes, I am a human being, and that should be the fundamental thing in terms of how we treat each other. But I still hold a Canadian group card, right? I still hold a North American group card, a Westerner card, so. And
it depends on I close my book towards the end. I talk about initiation and rituals and group belonging. Often you have to pay a price to become part of the group. There's a testing period. And so if you happen to be, say, an elite Navy SEAL commando in the U.S., I mean, that's going to dominate all the other group identities you probably have. That's the strongest one because you had to earn it and because of the hell you went through to get it. If anybody's welcome, if we all get a participation, ribbon for running the race, then it's meaningless. So there has to actually be suffering or obstacles to membership in certain groups, and that actually tests your loyalty and fidelity to the group.
Yeah. And I think we're getting near the end here, but I think a great spot to end is just to sort of tell people that it's really okay to be a part of groups, and it's more than okay. It's unavoidable.
It's inevitable. Exactly. The example I use once is I went to Australia and I had a friend of mine take me to Australian rules football game, and it was I forget where the Brisbane Lions against whatever the Carlton team was. and we were in Brisbane. And so, but she bought me one of these little scarves, with the team name on it, because she was like a third generation Carlton fan. And all of a sudden I'm a Carlton fan and I'm rooting for them. I mean, we snap into group identification automatically. We can't avoid it. You can try to compensate for it or keep an eye on it or be more conscious of it, but that need to belong to groups and snap over the smallest differences into differing groups is absolutely a fundamental human thing.
Yeah, that's fascinating because that snap that happens. When I was young, I moved to a neighboring province, and they have, I don't know, have you heard of Newfoundland?
Yeah, of course.
Newfoundland.
They have where the average age is of having a baby is 12.
Yeah, that's the place. Yeah. So
Sorry, I'm going to get more hate mail from the newbies now. No, I had a friend from Newfoundland, but now she's in Victoria Island, so she moved way far away.
No, they can take a joke. But yeah, they have this, obviously, really thick accent, right? So I moved there. My parents split up when I was about 9 or 10, and so me and my mother, my sister moved to small town Newfoundland. So from the age of like 9 to like 22 or so, I was like ingrained into this accent, right? And you take it on, and it's not that it happens. It's like, no, a part of you wants to take it on because then you're part of the group and you can actually share in that. So I really felt that. But an interesting thing happened when my father came to visit when I was graduating. So I was about 8 years into this, accent, and I would normally turn it off when I was around him, just naturally, again. And so I'm showing
because
him
you
my
want to belong to his group, to the family group that you grew up in.
Exactly. And it's something that you don't even think about. It just happens. And so I'm showing him the school, I'm talking to him normal and, showing him this. And then one of my friends walked by and I say hi to him, like, how's it going, in this thick Newfoundland accent, right? And it was just like for one sentence, on and off. And it was like the first time that my father actually really heard that. And that's you can't avoid it. Like there was no rational part of there was no rational thought into it for me. It was just like it just happened. It was like, oh, a newfie friend. Yeah. How you getting on? And that's it. And
so the most fundamental need we have is to be seen and taken care of, and a sense of belonging and safety comes from being in the tribe. I mean, you talk about the stress hormones are released when we're physically out of sight of other people. It makes us want to go back and be within sight of them. Things like that. So that's very fundamental. And so group conformity is a very powerful thing. It can be used. There's a playbook for how to turn a democracy into fascism, how to, we see a lot of that going on around the world right now. It's an unfortunate cultural time we live in, but we're getting more sophisticated at manipulating it with social media and the echo chambers that we participate in there. So I'm actually not that optimistic long term about, Western liberal democracies holding together very well in the next few years, but hopefully I'm wrong.
Yeah, to circle back, that's the thing we talked about when I mentioned that I felt both great about our discussion, but also slightly depressed. It was that you weren't too hopeful on the West surviving, and
well, let me take it back full circle then and tell you what I told you then. Welcome to the human condition.
That's right. Yeah. It's a shame, but you were really convincing in your arguments. That's sad, but I suppose, as you said, the human condition.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that you mentioned this book in the context of my marketing work. So Unleash Your Primal Brain is the book, and you can get it at, actually, you can get a free chapter of your choice at primalbrain.com/book.
Of your choice?
Yeah, you get to pick
one. I like
one.
That.
Yeah.
Wow.
Any one of the 23 chapters. And so, but the reason that I kind of wrote it was not just for business. It's not a business book. If you want to read it for leadership or sales or marketing or persuasion, you put that hat on. But it has a lot to say about culture, what kind of communities we form as well. And at the personal level, things about addiction, sleep, how to live a quality life. So it's really kind of I tried to write the operating manual for human beings in a very readable form. So
I think you did a great job. I'll be honest. It's like you said, it covers a lot of material, like a broad range, but it's put quite like in an easy to read fashion. And you've got these little boxes which you pre-warned me about.
Yeah, the call out.
The
Oh,
call
and
outs.
speaking of which, when I do the call outs in the audible version of the book and the audio version, I'm speaking in a normal voice, and then I go, "This is a really important point," and so I changed my tone of voice, and I've had a couple of people listen to it, and they go, "Boy, your recording quality sucks. Your voice keeps changing," and I'm like, "No, those are the important points." So it's how do you make a call out in an audio book? That's what I tried to do.
Yeah, that's it's interesting. You need to get like put on a different accent or something. Put on a Canadian accent or a British accent.
Do me a favor. Say progress.
Uh-oh.
No, just say it.
Progress.
Oh, you did it the American way.
Progress. You see this? Yeah. You talk about the human condition. I'll tell you what the Canadian condition is. We are stuck constantly in between British and American culture. So yeah, because you mentioned on our call last time that I said process, right?
Yeah,
process. I said process.
Yeah.
Yeah, but honestly, I say both. Right?
Well, I believe it was Mark Twain I once said about America and England are two countries separated by a common language. That quote is just brilliant. It's true of Canada and the UK too.
Yeah, I mean we share so much, right? So we're all human beings at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, and I think that whatever sphere of life you're in, trying to understand what makes us tick is gonna. I'm less and less concerned about individual stuff. Like I said, I used to be in online marketing, did very technical things, and now I'm just drawn to the universal, the things that serve me more of the time, or more people more of the time. And that was really my impetus for writing this book, was to explain ourselves to ourselves. I think it would benefit any person.
Well, I think it's great too, and again, the move, not the move away from individualistic ideas, but in a sense that I suppose that's what it is. It's finding and realizing the benefit in groups, and not only in groups but in family. Because again, this is something else that I feel in my generation we're not valuing as much as family. Like people don't want sort of long-term relationships, and people don't want kids anymore, like in the West. And I don't really want to make a judgment call on them, because I think that's a personal decision, but like I keep thinking about that change that family member went through after she had the kid. And I'm thinking how sad it would be to go through life and never experience having a child, and full disclaimer, I don't have a kid, but I still feel like that's something that there's no replacement for it. And I think it would be a shame to go through life and not experience it.
Well, that's a tough one. I'm afraid I'm not going to give any opinions or advice on that, other than to say I'm at 2 and holding. I had a vasectomy about a year ago, so I'm not adding any more to the
there
world.
You go.
But I think that that brings us back to meaning and back to the philosophy. And I think it's very important to think about what your legacy is going to be. Certainly, children are one form of it, but they're not the only one.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Tim. I think we'll end it there. Thanks so much for talking with me. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And if people want more information about my public speaking or marketing consulting, you can check out timash.com. And of course, the book is at primalbrain.com.
Yep, I'll definitely link it. So I'll flash it for the camera here.
We'll both do that.
There you go. Group conformity.
Group conformity. Yes, you got me to comply.
All right, Tim. Until next time.
Thanks, Brendan. It was a lot of fun.
Cheers.